Usually when we talk about getting a medical diagnosis, there is this underlying expectation of precision, right?
Yeah, like it's a math problem.
Exactly. It feels almost like engineering. Like if you take a really bad fall on a ski slope and you break your arm, the process is just incredibly straightforward. You go to the hospital, they put you in a machine, the X-ray produces this, clear image with a jagged white line right across your radius.
Yeah, and the doctor just points to it and says, there it is. That is the exact point of failure.
That is the problem. It's totally binary, broken or not broken. You can literally see the failure, which, makes the pathway to fixing it incredibly obvious. We're just naturally drawn to that kind of visible, categorized problem solving.
We really are. But then you step into the world of organizational health, or like neurodevelopment, or even just trying to figure out why a seemingly invincible business suddenly just collapses, and that X-ray machine is completely broken. We are looking at a diagnostic landscape that is, well, it's entirely murky.
It's totally dark. So welcome everyone to week 2 of the masterclass at the Bioeconomic Clinic at drcks.com. I am Dr. Chicks, and I am thrilled to be guiding you through today's operation.
And I am Chicky, your AI and ecosystem specialist.
Okay, let's unpack this. Yeah. Today, we are basically building a new diagnostic imaging tool because the failures you see around you, the massive corporations bleeding out, the chronic, inescapable burnout you might be feeling right now, right? Or just the sudden inability to focus deeply on a single task. These are not moral feelings. They really aren't. No. They're not a lack of willpower, and they aren't just, bad financial luck. They're biological diseases.
Yeah, so many people are feeling that.
And they're caused by this fatal error in how we view the world, which is operating living, breathing systems as if they were rigid, unfeeling machines.
What's fascinating here is how deeply ingrained that mechanical view actually is in our culture. Like we look at a massive multinational corporation, think of the giant glass towers piercing the skyline, the tens of thousands of employees, a logo you've recognized literally since you were a child. Yeah, monoliths, right. And we assume it's a permanent fixture of the landscape. It feels like a mountain. But if we actually look at the structural integrity of these monoliths, the data tells a deeply unsettling story about their true lifespan.
I really want to dig into that illusion of corporate immortality today because it basically sets the stage for everything else we're diagnosing. Yeah, if I look at the Fortune 500, my instinct is that these entities are just too big to fail. They have endless capital, massive legal teams, global reach, but you're looking at the research from Ari DeJuice and the numbers are just almost hard to believe.
Think so, yeah. They absolutely shattered the illusion. So Ari DeJuice, he was this brilliant thinker who spent 38 years at the Royal Dutch Group. Wow, yeah, a massive career. He eventually became their group planning coordinator. And back in the 1980s, amidst these huge global oil shocks and economic turbulence, he and his colleagues set out to study corporate longevity. They really wanted to know what made some companies survive centuries while others just collapsed overnight.
Almost 4 decades. Why did some weather the storm and others just snap?
Exactly. And the foundational data they uncovered was staggering. A Dutch survey of corporate life expectancy across Japan and Europe revealed that the average life expectancy of all companies, regardless of size, is a mere 12 and a half years. 12 years? Just 12 and a half years.
Wait, 12 and a half years. That is barely a blip. A company founded today would be dead before a child born on the exact same day even reaches high school.
Right. It's incredibly volatile, but shh.
Surely the giants, the massive multinationals that dominate the global economy, they have to fare significantly better than the average mom and pop shop.
You would naturally assume the sheer mass of a Fortune 500 company would provide some kind of buffer against mortality. But the data shows that the average life expectancy of a multinational corporation, like a Fortune 500 company or its equivalent, is only between 40 and 50 years. Yeah, and to put the sheer speed of that volatility into perspective, DeJuice noted that a full third of the companies listed in the 1970 Fortune 500 had completely vanished by 1983.
50 years, Mag.
Let's.
That sink in for a second. A full third of the most powerful, resource-rich, dominant economic engines on the planet were entirely wiped off the map in just 13 years. It's wild. That is a catastrophic mortality rate. If like a third of our major cities vanished in a decade, we would call it an apocalyptic event. So how does that happen? What is the actual mechanism of death for an entity that holds that much power?
Well, Dejuice attributed this endemic premature failure to a fundamental misdiagnosis by the people running those organizations. Leadership basically views the company purely as an economic machine designed for the singular purpose of producing money. Yes, they completely ignore what the company actually is in reality, which is a human community. It's a biological organism. When you view a company as a machine, you naturally build a mechanistic organizational model.
Mechanical view. I can picture exactly what that model looks like, honestly. It's the classic corporate structure we all know, like really tall, rigid hierarchies, an endless labyrinth of rules and standard operating procedures. Highly centralized power where a few people at the very top pull levers and thousands of people at the bottom just, turn gears. Everything is optimized for predictability and ultimate control.
The red tape, yeah. It operates entirely on the philosophy of bureaucracy and industrial engineering. And to be totally fair, in a perfectly stable, highly predictable environment, a machine is incredibly efficient. So nothing, exactly. But the global economy is not a controlled laboratory. When the environment becomes volatile, when new technologies emerge, when supply chains fracture, when the ecosystem literally starts to burn around them, this mechanical structure triggers a fatal biological condition. We refer to this as the stasis trap. The stasis trap.
I imagine this is a disease of complete paralysis.
That is the exact clinical presentation. It's this fatal tendency for an organization to stick blindly to rigid 5-year plans and highly optimized routines, completely refusing to adapt to the shifting reality outside their windows. Right. They can't adapt because a machine is only built to execute its original programming. The organism suffers from what we might call mechanistic ossification. It literally hardens, loses all internal flexibility, and when external pressure is applied, it doesn't bend. It just
shatters. I always think of this in terms of thermodynamics and like a combustion engine. If you treat your business, or frankly, if you treat yourself as an individual like a machine, you are binding yourself to the laws of physics that govern machines, which is very dangerous. Imagine a combustion engine. You're running it right on the red line, foot pinned to the floor, maximizing the RPMs to get the absolute highest output possible. In a spreadsheet, that looks like peak efficiency. But physically,
yeah, the numbers look great for a minute.
if you never let the heat dissipate, if you never allow the engine to power down and rest, the thermal energy builds up within that closed system. The lubricating oil just burns off. The friction coefficient between the pistons and the cylinders skyrockets. And eventually, the engine doesn't just gradually slow down, it violently seizes. It breaks catastrophically.
That analogy perfectly isolates the failure point, I think. Yeah, in a living biological system, adaptation and rest are not luxuries, They are fundamental requirements to dissipate that internal friction and repair the organism. Right. When you aggressively strip away those biological necessities in the blind pursuit of mechanical efficiency, you trigger a cascade of biological decay. Which brings us to the actual pathology of how this death occurs. Not just in corporations, but in the people inside them.
Yeah, I really want to know how past success and that relentless drive for efficiency literally caused this decay. Because nobody sets out to destroy their own company, right? Or burn themselves out. They think they're doing the right thing. They think they are optimizing.
To understand the mechanism of that decay, we have to look at what Dejuice identified as the puddle pathology. When leadership becomes entirely captured by the mechanical view, their timeline drastically shrinks. They become obsessed with maximizing short-term metrics to prove the machine is working. Specifically, they focus heavily on maximizing short-term return on capital employed, or ROCE.
Classic Wall Street metric, yeah. Maximize the return, minimize the capital tied up. So the immediate reflex is to just start trimming the fat.
Exactly. And they use the word trimming, which sounds surgical and safe, but what they are actually doing is aggressively stripping away human capital and adaptive capacity. They cut employee training programs because, well, they don't show an immediate quarterly return. They slash long-term research and development. They lay off the veteran employees who hold all the deep, unwritten adaptive knowledge of the firm. In doing so, they completely destroy the entity's metabolic reserve.
Okay, let's define that term for the listener, because metabolic reserve is crucial here. In biology, metabolic reserve is basically the stored energy and physiological capacity required to survive a sudden shock to the system, like a severe illness or a period of starvation.
Right, and in an organization, the metabolic reserve is the unallocated cognitive bandwidth of its people. It's the slack in the system. It's the budget set aside for wild, weird experimentation.
The stuff that doesn't immediately pay the bills, but keeps you alive tomorrow.
Precisely. Deju illustrates the danger of losing this reserve by contrasting the river company with the stagnant puddle. A river company flows, it adapts over centuries. The individual drops of water inside it, the employees, the managers, the specific products, they change constantly as they evaporate and rain back down. Exactly. The river navigates the landscape, eroding new paths when a mountain rises in its way, adjusting to obstacles, continuing its journey to the sea.
But the river itself keeps going.
It's a living community that learns and shapes its environment. The puddle is a company that has been ruthlessly trimmed of all its adaptive capacity just to maximize immediate profit. It has no flow, it sits completely still in one highly optimized place. It's entirely dependent on the current weather conditions remaining exactly as they are. I see. And when the sun comes out, when the market environment shifts even slightly, the puddle cannot move. It just evaporates.
And the puddle. Okay, I want to take this out of the realm of metaphor because the puddle pathology is not just a poetic way to describe bad management. There is hardcore, uncompromising math behind this. To truly diagnose this, we need to dive into advanced bioeconomics, specifically looking at the Gordon-Schaefer model from Fisheries Bioeconomics.
This is such a perfect framework for this because this is where biological population dynamics and human economic extraction perfectly intersect. So the Gordon-Schaefer model is fundamentally about how living resources respond to being harvested. It begins by mapping out the biological logistic growth model, which was originally developed by Pierre-François Verhulst back in like 1838.
Okay, I am struggling to picture how a 19th century biological curve maps to a modern corporate balance sheet. Let's build a model from the ground up. If I have a closed ecosystem, how does this work?
Okay, imagine a completely closed ecosystem, like an isolated lake. Inside that lake, you have a population of fish. That population grows based on its intrinsic rate of reproduction, basically how fast the fish multiply. However, that growth is heavily constrained by the carrying capacity of the environment. The lake only has so much food, so much oxygen, and literally so much physical space. It can only support a specific maximum amount of biological mass.
Simple enough.
If you leave the fish population entirely alone, it grows in a classic S-curve, a sigmoid curve. Starts slow, accelerates rapidly as the population expands, and then flattens out as it hits that carrying capacity limit, stabilizing in a state of equilibrium.
Starts slow, gets fast, then flatten. But reality of economics is that we do not leave the lake alone. We build a due, we launch boats, and we start extracting the fish to sell them.
And the exact moment you introduce extraction, you introduce the concept of maximum sustainable yield, or MSY. If you map out that biological S-curve, the growth rate is actually highest right in the middle of the curve, before it starts slowing down as it approaches the limit. Okay, maximum sustainable yield is the exact mathematical point where you can harvest the absolute maximum number of fish continuously, year after year, without permanently crashing the population. You are basically skimming off the exact number of new fish born each season. It represents the absolute peak of the biological production curve.
So from a purely biological standpoint, MSY looks like the target. But businesses do not operate purely on biological yield. They don't really care about the raw number of fish. They care about the profit margin. They operate on economics.
Which brings us to a far more complex metric, maximum economic yield, or MEY. MEY takes into account the friction and the actual costs of the extraction process. You have to buy the boats, pay for the diesel fuel, pay the wages of the fishermen, maintain the nets. Exactly. Maximum economic yield is the specific point on the curve where the difference between the total sustainable revenue you generate from selling the fish and the total cost of catching them is at its absolute highest. It is the point where
It's not free to fish.
economic rent or pure profit is maximized.
So EY is the ultimate sweet spot. It's the goal of any rational economic actor. But here's the paradox I really want to highlight about that sweet spot. To hit MEY, you have to actively restrain yourself because MEY almost always requires significantly less effort and results in a larger, healthier, remaining biomass in the lake than MSY. Yes, to maximize your long-term profit, you actually have to fish less aggressively than the biological limit allows. You have to willingly leave value on the table today.
That is the critical insight. Restraint is mathematically required for long-term optimization. But what happens when the environment is not controlled by a single rational actor? What happens when a company operates its internal teams, or an entire industry operates, like an open access fishery?
You mean a scenario where there are no property rights, no regulations, and anyone can just back their truck up to the lake and drop a massive net?
Yes. In an open access regime, rational restraint completely vanishes. If I leave a fish in the water to ensure the long-term health of the lake, my competitor is just going to catch it tomorrow. Exactly. So the effort level just keeps increasing. More boats, bigger nets. The effort pushes right past the maximum economic yield. It blows past the biological limit of the maximum sustainable yield, and it continues all the way to what bioeconomists call the bioeconomic equilibrium.
Right, so I might as well take it now. Which, I mean, sounds balanced and nice, but it is actually a disaster.
Right. It is an absolute, complete disaster. The bioeconomic equilibrium is the exact point where the total costs of extracting the heavily depleted fish exactly equal the total revenues. The economic rent, the profit, drops to absolute zero. Everyone is working themselves to the bone just to break even, and the biological mass of the lake is severely, perhaps permanently depleted. Man.
If you are listening to this right now, perhaps sitting in a cubicle or driving home from a grueling shift, I really want you to think about your last performance review or the last massive project your team was handed. Were you being managed for your long-term maximum economic yield, where your health and cognitive capacity were actually protected, right? Or were you treated like an open access fishery, where leadership aggressively extracted every possible ounce of effort until you were totally depleted?
Probably not.
Just ahead an arbitrary quarterly KPI, because this destructive extraction is driven by a very specific economic metric called the discount rate.
And the concept of the discount rate is just terrifying when applied to human systems. In economics, the discount rate is the literal price of time. It measures an individual's, a society's, or a corporation's intertemporal preference. A high discount rate means that the entity places a significantly higher value on immediate short-term consumption than it does on future stability or long-term survival.
It is the ultimate expression of impatience. Like, I want my profit today. I want my stock price to bump this afternoon, and I literally do not care if the lake is a toxic, empty mud puddle 10 years from now, because, I'll be gone anyway.
Exactly. If an organization operates with a sky-high discount rate, demanding massive quarterly profits over everything else, it behaves exactly like an unregulated open-access fleet of trawlers. It aggressively harvests its own people. It burns through the goodwill of its clients. It slashes its innovation budget. It extracts and extracts until the cognitive and human biomass of the company completely crashes. In the bioeconomic literature, this devastating phenomenon is literally called the fishing out effect.
Fishing out effect. You extract all the value until the ecosystem completely collapses. And this brings us right down to the individual level. We call this evolutionary atrophy because you, the listener, you are the biological mass in this hyper-processed open access economy.
Yeah, and when we view the individual through this lens, it raises a deeply concerning biological question. What physically happens to the human brain when it's forced to survive in this environment? If you're operating inside a system that demands constant high-speed extraction, a system that relies on short-term dopamine hits, rapid context switching between 50 different browser tabs, and just the constant demand for instant gratification, your own physiological systems begin to suffer.
Yeah, your capacity for deep work, for strategic, uninterrupted thinking, for patience and long-term planning, it all begins to degrade. You can literally feel it happening. You try to sit down and read a dense book, and after 3 pages, your brain is just screaming for a distraction. You reach for your phone without even realizing it.
You are experiencing the fundamental biological principle of use it or lose it, occurring at the neurological level. In evolutionary biology, if an organism stops using a specific capability because the environment no longer demands it, like cavefish losing their eyesight in total darkness, that physical capability weakens and eventually disappears over generations. But in our hyper-accelerated digital world, this atrophy is happening within a single human lifespan. If your daily environment only ever requires you to skim fragmented information, and you never actually engage the neural pathways required for deep, sustained focus, those specific pathways physically weaken. That is evolutionary atrophy.
You essentially become the stagnant puddle on an individual level. You lose the metabolic reserve to handle complex, nuanced problems. But as frightening as this internal decay is, this atrophy is really only half of the diagnosis. It gets much worse. Because the other halves of the problem is that the external environment, the selection environment we are all trying to survive in, is shifting faster than at any point in the history of human civilization. We are currently facing the single greatest environmental shift ever recorded.
Yeah, it gets worse.
Which is the mass integration of artificial intelligence.
And the collision between our atrophying human capacity and this rapidly evolving technology creates an acute systemic crisis that we call the cognitive lack.
I want to really explore the massive speed mismatch here. We have traditional human bureaucracies on one side and completely frictionless AI integration on the other. It feels like racing a horse-drawn carriage against a bullet train.
The mismatch is rooted in the very structure of how these systems operate. Human bureaucracies, by their fundamental design, require reliability and reproducibility. As organizational ecologists frequently point out, this demand for reliability creates structural inertia. Exactly. A corporation operates on standard operating procedures. Changing those routines requires endless meetings, building consensus, retraining everyone, and spending immense political capital. It makes the organization incredibly slow to adapt because changing routines is inherently disruptive, highly frictional, and incredibly risky for the humans involved.
Nobody wants to stick their neck out.
Right, but AI does not experience friction or office politics. It operates with massive frictionless speed. It processes, integrates, and scales exponentially across networks in milliseconds. There is a fundamental, unbridgeable mismatch in the metabolism of the two systems.
So the human organization, operating at the speed of bureaucracy, simply cannot keep up. But to truly understand why this lag is so dangerous and how we might actually bridge it, we need to move beyond just talking about speed. We need to look at the structural differences between how an artificial neural network thinks and how the biological human brain actually reasons. You were reviewing the recent insights from Martin Reeves at the BCG Henderson Institute regarding this exact dynamic.
Yes, and Reeves outlines a framework that is vital for diagnosing this condition. He draws a really sharp critical distinction between deductive reasoning and inductive reasoning. Artificial intelligence, particularly the large language models and machine learning systems we're currently deploying, is an absolute unparalleled powerhouse of deductive analysis.
Okay, so define deductive force in this context.
Deductive reasoning involves starting with a set of known rules or premises and applying them to data to reach a logical conclusion. AI can ingest petabytes of historical data, identify incredibly weak, subtle signals hidden in that massive noise, and optimize complex variables with mathematically perfect precision.
It is the ultimate calculator. If the rules are established and the data is available, it will find the most efficient path forward instantly.
But, and this is the crucial limitation, it lacks true inductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning is the biological ability to observe a completely novel situation, draw upon totally unrelated lived experiences, and make an educated, creative leap when mathematical calculation is impossible.
It's the gut feeling combined with logic.
Yes, it's the ability to generate a new hypothesis in the face of the unknown. Reeves uses a brilliant analogy to illustrate this limitation. Imagine a meteor suddenly crashing through the ceiling of your living.
Completely unprecedented, chaotic event. An algorithm has absolutely no historical training data labeled meteor strikes living room.
Right. It cannot deduce a solution because there are no established premises for that. It would throw an error code or hallucinate a completely irrelevant response based on its closest adjacent data. It basically crashes.
But a human reacts contextually and inductively. You don't freeze and wait for more training data. You immediately check on your family's safety. You visually assess the structural damage to the load-bearing walls. You realize you can't stay there, so you use your phone to book a hotel. You call your insurance. You use inductive logic, emotional intelligence, and situational awareness to navigate a completely novel, terrifying situation.
You improvise.
And still achieve your overarching goal of survival and stabilization. AI, in its current architectural form, just cannot do this. No, it can't. So this brings us to a massive inflection point for the listener. If AI is so unimaginably good at the deductive heavy lifting, the data processing, the pattern recognition, the optimization, shouldn't we just surrender? Shouldn't a company or an individual just outsource all that complex frictional thinking to the machine to save time?
If we connect that impulse back to the concept of evolutionary atrophy, complete cognitive outsourcing is the most dangerous path you could possibly take. It's a biological trap. A trap? Yes. If humans succumb to the puddle pathology and decide to outsource all their complex thinking, all their cognitive friction, and all their problem solving to AI, they do not just become lazy, they trigger a highly destructive neurobiological process called catastrophic synaptic pruning.
Okay, let's get under the hood of that. Synaptic pruning is the brain literally clearing out its own wiring, right?
Exactly. The human brain is a massive energy sink. It consumes roughly 20% of the body's metabolic energy, despite being a tiny fraction of its weight. To survive, the brain ruthlessly optimizes its energy expenditure. When you learn a complex skill, you build dense neural pathways. But if you stop using those pathways, the brain physically degrades and prunes those neural circuits to save metabolic energy.
It literally dismantles the road because no cars are driving on it.
It recycles the biological material. So if you allow the machine to write all your nuanced emails, to draft all your strategic plans, to summarize all your reading, and to perform all your analytical thinking, you don't just become temporarily reliant on a software program, you physically, structurally, lose the cognitive capacity to perform those complex tasks yourself. Your prefrontal cortex atrophies. You are engineering your own biological obsolescence.
You are intentionally blinding yourself because you bought a seeing eye dog. Man, that is bleak. So if the solution isn't to fight the AI, because you obviously can't outcalculate a supercomputer, and the solution isn't to surrender to it and let your brain atrophy, what is the prescription? How do we survive this environment? We have to become what we call a cognitive hybrid.
Exactly. A cognitive hybrid is an individual or an entire organizational culture that actively and successfully merges biological intuition, deep empathy, and inductive imagination with the staggering deductive process in the speed of artificial intelligence. You let the machine handle the petabytes of historical data. You let it run the predictive model. Right. You fiercely protect, exercise, and cultivate your uniquely human capacity for inductive reasoning, ethical judgment,
But you don't let it make the leap.
and creative leaps into the unknown.
You use the machine as a powered exoskeleton to augment your strength, not as a wheelchair that allows your legs to wither away.
That is the perfect way to conceptualize the boundary line. You must maintain the cognitive friction required to keep your neural pathways robust while leveraging the machine to eliminate the rote deductive friction that just slows you down.
I love that framework. But I need to stop us right here. I really need to push back hard on this entire line of reasoning, because we are throwing around a lot of heavy biological terminology today. We're talking about evolution, mutation, adaptation, atrophy, and Darwinism. If we are applying all of this to economics and human business choices, I can practically hear the ghost of Edith Penrose screaming at us from the 1950s.
Absolutely, it's a critical challenge. Edith Penrose's 1952 critique regarding the use of biological analogies in economics is legendary, and if we don't address it head-on, our entire diagnostic model basically falls apart. What is her specific objection?
Well, her objection is rooted entirely in intentionality. In true biological evolution, mutations are entirely blind. They're just random genetic copying errors. A giraffe did not consciously look at a tall tree, hold a strategic planning meeting, and intentionally decide to mutate a longer neck. Right. The long neck was a random error that just happened to provide a survival advantage. But in business and in our personal careers, we are not blind cells. Humans make conscious, highly strategic choices. We do market research.
It doesn't work like that.
We run R&D departments. We intentionally pivot our business models. Doesn't calling corporate development evolution completely erase human intentionality? And honestly, even worse, doesn't throwing around terms like Darwinism just lead us right back to social Darwinism, which is just a vile excuse for ruthless, laissez-faire capitalism, waving away mass layoffs and corporate cruelty as natural selection doing its job?
Your pushback is not only valid, it is morally necessary. We must be crystal clear before we go any further. This clinic does not in any way endorse or validate crude social Darwinism.
Thank you. Let's make that explicit.
We are just impartially reporting on the models used in modern evolutionary economics. Social Darwinism is a deeply flawed pseudoscientific framework that emerged in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. It has historically been used to justify extreme economic inequality, imperialist cruelty, and far worse, entirely under the false guise of nature taking its course. We completely reject that. Nature does not dictate human morality. Furthermore, as modern evolutionary economists continually point out, the concept of fitness in biology simply means reproductive success within a very specific environmental context. It absolutely does not mean moral worth, and it does not even necessarily equate to brute strength or ruthless aggression. In fact, if you look at the natural world, nature frequently selects for extreme, highly complex cooperation and symbiosis over pure composition.
Okay, I'm really glad we drew that ethical line in the sand. So, if we entirely reject social Darwinism and we accept Penrose's critique that human business choices are not random blind mutations, how do we rescue the biological metaphor? How does evolutionary economics actually function if our choices are intentional?
We rescue it by looking at the core underlying mechanisms of the evolutionary process: variation, selection, and retention. We don't map them purely biologically, we map them organizationally. In biology, variation is indeed a random genetic mutation, but in modern evolutionary economics, we apply these three concepts to the firm itself. The genotype, the underlying DNA of the company, is represented by its organizational routines, its standard operating procedures, its unwritten cultural norms.
And the phenotype, the physical expression of that DNA, the animal interacting with the world, is the company's specific products, its pricing strategies, its marketing campaigns, and its actual market actions.
Precisely. So where does Penrose's human intentionality fit into this model? Human intentionality, human creativity, and directed R&D drive the variation. We purposefully, consciously create new routines, write new software, and launch new products. That is the mutation in the economic model, and it is highly intentional, not blind.
But the selection environment, the ecosystem where that product actually has to survive, that remains completely blind and uncompromising.
Yes, the market itself provides the selection environment. You can have all the brilliant intentionality in the world. You can spend 10 years designing what you truly believe is the perfect world-changing product, but if the market, the external ecosystem, rejects it, it dies. The market does not care about your intentions. It selects entirely based on economic fitness within the current context. And finally, retention occurs when a successful new routine or product survives the market selection,
Brutal Patreon.
generates profit, and is subsequently standardized, copied, and passed down within the organization's culture, or, aggressively imitated by competitors.
So the evolutionary model actually holds up beautifully as long as we accurately map the variables. It's not about blind random mutation, it's about highly intentional variation colliding with an uncompromising, rapidly shifting selection environment.
Exactly. And returning to our initial diagnosis, this framework highlights exactly why the stasis trap is so deadly. If an organization has massive structural inertia and absolutely refuses to generate variation, if it refuses to mutate its routines or allow its employees the cognitive bandwidth to experiment, it cannot possibly survive when the external selection environment suddenly changes due to something like a...
Okay, so we have the diagnosis. We understand the pathology. If top-down, rigid mechanical management is a guaranteed dead end, and crude social Darwinism is nothing but a pseudoscientific excuse for toxic behavior, how do we actively design the cure? How do we build this living company that Ari DeJews talked about? How do you, the listener, build a career or an organization that actually thrives in an unpredictable, volatile selection environment?
We look for the cure in the ultimate R&D laboratory, the one that has been running continuous, rigorous, planet-wide trials for nearly 4 billion years, nature itself. We employ the discipline of biomimicry.
Biomimicry. Okay. Looking at how biological organisms solve incredibly complex engineering resources and systemic problems, and essentially stealing their blueprints to apply it to human challenges. Exactly. And the most profound fundamental lesson the biology teaches us about managing massive complexity in a shifting environment is the absolute superiority of bottom-up emergence versus top-down mechanical control.
I really want to illustrate this with an experiment that completely breaks my brain every time I think about it. Let's talk about the slime mold and the Tokyo transit system. If you are listening to this, prepare to have your assumptions about intelligence completely shattered.
It is arguably the greatest masterclass in decentralized intelligence ever recorded. In 2010, a team of researchers in Japan took a specific species of brainless, single-celled amoeba, a slime mold known as Physarum polycephalum. They placed this organism on a sterile agar plate.
Just to be perfectly clear for everyone, we are talking about a brainless, pulsing yellow puddle of biological goo. It has no nervous system, no neurons whatsoever. None. The researchers then placed oat flakes, which happened to be the slime mold's absolute favorite food source, around the agar plate, but they didn't just scatter them randomly. They positioned the oat flakes to exactly map the geographical locations of the major cities and suburban hubs surrounding Tokyo.
So the central origin point of the mold is Tokyo Station, and the oats represent the surrounding suburban nodes. They essentially built a topographical map out of breakfast cereals.
Precisely. They then simply let the slime mold grow and explore. Initially, the mold spread out relatively evenly in all directions, exploring the available space to locate the resources. But within a matter of hours, as it found the oats, it began to dramatically refine its shape. It thickened and reinforced the specific biological tubes that connected the oat flakes most efficiently, and it simultaneously withdrew and pruned away the redundant, inefficient connections that led nowhere.
We are seeing the physical manifestation of synaptic pruning again, but this time in a puddle of goo optimizing a transit map.
And the final stabilized network of biological tubes that the slime mold created was remarkably, almost perfectly mathematically similar to the actual physical Tokyo railway system.
I really want the listener to let that sink in. Decades of intensive urban planning, billions of dollars, armies of civil engineers, massive supercomputers, and some of the most brilliant human minds on the planet spent a century designing the Tokyo transit system to balance efficiency, cost, and resilience. And a brainless, single-celled amoeba recreated that exact level of efficiency in a plastic petri dish in a matter of hours. Just looking for breakfast.
What this experiment definitively demonstrates is that you do not need a centralized, top-down brain or a rigid hierarchy or a CEO barking orders from a corner office to achieve highly optimized, incredibly complex, resilient systems. The slime mold does not have a manager. It operates entirely on simple local rules of exploration, positive reinforcement when a resource is found, and a rigorous pruning of inefficiency. The intelligence is not centralized, it is entirely distributed throughout the mass of the organism itself.
The mold has no manager. This is the biological concept of emergence.
Yes. Emergence occurs when incredibly simple, localized interactions among individual parts generate highly complex, sophisticated global behaviors across the whole system.
The classic, breathtaking visual for emergence is a starling murmuration. If you've ever been outside at dusk and seen those massive, shifting, liquid clouds of thousands of birds swooping and diving in the sky, moving completely fluidly as one giant cohesive organism, it looks choreographed. It looks like it must be programmed. Our mechanical brains immediately assume there must be a leader bird at the very front of the flock, shouting instructions and telling everyone when the bank left.
There is no leader. The flock has no central command structure.
None at all. That staggering, breathtaking complexity emerges from just 3 incredibly simple, localized rules that are hardwired into the neurobiology of every individual bird. Rule 1. Match your speed of the birds immediately next to you. Rule 2. Stay relatively close to your neighbors. Rule 3. Do not crash into them.
Match speed, stay close, avoid collision. From those 3 localized interactions, a flock of 50,000 independent birds can split apart to evade a diving falcon and instantly reform with fluid, instantaneous precision without a single central command ever being issued.
So applying this to our diagnosis today, what does this actually mean for building a symbiotic ecosystem in your business or in your own life?
It means that in a highly volatile, rapidly shifting environment, relying on centralized, top-down control is a massive structural vulnerability. The CEO, the central brain, cannot possibly process all the incoming data fast enough to issue accurate top-down orders when the ecosystem is burning. Exactly. A true living company distributes its intelligence to the extreme edges. It empowers local nodes, the individual employees, the small cross-functional teams to follow simple, clear principles rather than rigid rules.
They become the bottleneck.
This enables the entire organization to react, adapt, and swarm complex problems instantaneously, just like the murmuration evading the felt.
It is exactly like the mycelium fungal networks operating beneath the floor of an old-growth forest.
The mycelium is the perfect structural metaphor. These vast fungal networks operate entirely beneath the soil, connecting the root systems of thousands of individual trees and plants. They don't have a central brain dictating policy, yet they constantly, continuously exchange chemical information.
Right, they act as a massive resource network.
Yes, they actively shuttle carbon and nutrients from areas of the forest that have abundance to younger trees in areas of scarcity. They break down dead organic matter to aggressively recycle it back into the living system. The mycelium is the true hidden strength of the forest ecosystem. In a human workplace, it is the informal networks, the quiet relationships, the lateral communication channels, the undocumented favors, the human mycelium of the company that actually provides resilience and adaptive capacity, not the formal, rigid, mechanical organizational chart hanging on the wall.
And what absolutely fascinates me is that this biological paradigm is not just a philosophy for organizational structures or management theory. It is completely revolutionizing hardcore physical product engineering. The material solutions that nature has engineered over billions of years are so incredibly far beyond our clumsy mechanical brute force methods. Let's look at how we are actively stealing these blueprints to build better technology.
The field of product biomimicry provides incredible examples of replacing mechanical brute force with biological elegance. Let's examine a common engineering nightmare: marine mussels. These are the small bivalves you see clinging to rocks in the ocean.
Right, and if you have ever tried to apply tape or superglue or any adhesive to a wet surface in your house, you know it is practically impossible. The water molecules create an impenetrable physical barrier between the adhesive and the surface. Yet marine mussels live entirely in violent tidal zones, getting repeatedly pounded by massive waves, and they effortlessly, permanently glue themselves to wet, slippery rocks. How is that mechanically possible?
It's not mechanical, it's chemical. Scientists spent years studying the microscopic biochemistry of the mussel's foot. They discovered that the mussel secretes specialized proteins that are incredibly rich in a specific amino acid called dopa. The molecular structure of DOPA is unique because it aggressively displaces water molecules on an atomic level. It doesn't just try to stick to the water, it literally shoves the water out of the way, clearing the surface so the protein can bond directly, permanently
Pushes the water up.
with the minerals in the rock.
So human researchers looked at that biological mechanism and created a synthetic biomimetic polymer modeled exactly on that DOPA protein. And the results are staggering. This biomimetic glue performed 10 times better than heavy-duty toxic commercial adhesives when applied to polished aluminum, even when the application was done entirely underwater. It is non-toxic, wildly strong, and the blueprint was entirely stolen from a shellfish.
We see the exact same paradigm shift in optics and energy efficiency. Consider fireflies. Researchers who were trying to improve the efficiency of human LED light bulbs started studying the microscopic anatomy of the firefly's lantern, the part of the bug that actually glows. They discovered that the lantern is not smooth. It has highly asymmetrical microscopic projections, tiny jagged microstructures that help release the bioluminescent light efficiently into the air.
While human-engineered LEDs typically relied on perfectly symmetrical, smooth, mechanistic projections, assuming that neat geometry was more efficient.
Exactly. The human engineers assumed smooth meant optimized, but by abandoning their mechanical assumptions and actively adding those biologically inspired asymmetrical microstructures to the surface coating of commercial LEDs, they allowed significantly more light to escape the bulb, improving light extraction efficiency by a massive 90%.
A 90% leap in energy efficiency, simply from copying the anatomy of a bug's abdomen. I want to highlight one more example because it touches on how biology solves systemic ecological damage. Let's talk about spider webs in architectural glass.
This is a beautiful example of cross-species biomimicry. Every year, millions of birds are killed because they fly at full speed into human-engineered glass windows. The birds simply cannot see the transparent barrier. It is a massive unintentional ecological slaughter caused by human architecture. But if you observe nature, you will notice that birds very rarely fly into spider webs, even though the webs are practically invisible to the human eye. Right, because orb weaver spiders
Why is that?
purposefully build their webs using specific strands of silk that highly reflect ultraviolet light. Birds have receptors to see UV light, humans do not.
The spider doesn't want the bird to destroy its web, so it builds a bioluminescent stop sign that only the bird can see. So a design company called Biomimicry 3.8 studied this exact phenomenon and helped develop a product called Ornolux glass. It has a specialized UV reflective coating embedded in it, patterned exactly like the chaotic strands of an orb spider's web. To a human standing inside the building, it just looks like a perfectly clear, normal window. But to a bird flying towards it, it looks like a glowing, impenetrable, densely woven web, so they instinctively steer clear. It solves a massive ecological crisis using zero mechanical moving parts, just a shift in the visual spectrum inspired by a spider.
And we can scale this up to massive industrial applications too. Look at the aerodynamics of humpback whales. These are 40-ton creatures, yet they are incredibly, almost impossibly agile in the water. The biological secret lies in the tubercles, the large, jagged bumps running along the leading edge of their massive fingers.
Flippers. Again, mechanistic human thinking assumes that a perfectly smooth, sleek edge, like an airplane wing, would be the most aerodynamic or hydrodynamic shape possible.
The mechanical view demands smoothness, but extensive biological testing in wind tunnels showed that those jagged tubercles actually channel the water flow into tight vortices. This biological adaptation provides an 8% improvement in lift and a staggering 32% reduction in drag compared to a smooth flipper. That's huge. An engineering company applied this exact tuber-cold, bumpy design to the massive fiberglass blades of industrial wind turbines. The result: they massively increased the turbine's energy-generating efficiency and stability in turbulent winds.
The blueprints for survival and efficiency are literally all around us, if we stop acting like mechanics and start acting like biologists. Which brings us to the ultimate application for you, the listener. We have covered corporate mortality rates, the bioeconomics of fisheries, AI's deductive dominance, and the intelligence of slime molds. But why does all this dense theory matter to your daily life? How does it cure the burnout we discussed at the very start of the clinic?
It matters intensely because you are not a machine. You are a biological organism trying to survive and compete in a hyper-processed, rapidly accelerating, intensely demanding economy. The mechanical rules you were taught by this culture, the rules that tell you to work relentlessly, to optimize your daily routine like an industrial assembly line, to strip away your sleep and your rest to maximize your daily output. Those rules are fundamentally mathematically guaranteed to result in your eventual catastrophic collapse. You will seize like the over-revved combustion engine.
And as AI continues to scale, you absolutely cannot outmachine the machine. If you attempt to compete with artificial intelligence on the basis of deductive processing, raw data ingestion, and frictionless speed, you will lose. And worse, you will suffer devastating evolutionary atrophy in the process, pruning away the very neural pathways that make you valuable.
To survive, you must abandon the mechanical view entirely. You must actively embrace cognitive hybridization. You must fiercely protect, defend, and cultivate your deep inductive reasoning, your empathy, and your creative friction, while simultaneously leveraging the speed of the AI tools around you to handle the rote calculation. Furthermore, you must build your career, your team, and your business not as a rigid top-down hierarchy, but as a living symbiotic ecosystem. Distribute your intelligence, empower the nodes, be the river that adapts and flows, not the optimized puddle waiting to evaporate.
And crucially, you must recognize that to maintain your metabolic reserve, your ability to survive the inevitable shocks, you deeply need the friction of challenging inductive work, and you absolutely require the biological necessity of rest. But what happens when you try to apply this cure and the culture around you pushes back? What happens when the broader economy tells you that rest is a sign of weakness and that relentless, unending forward motion is the only acceptable path to success?
That thermodynamic lie is exactly what we will confront when we return next week.
Next week, we enter week 3 of the masterclass. We are going to directly confront entropic collapse. We are going to prove that the modern hustle culture is not just unhealthy, it is a fundamental thermodynamic lie. Any closed system that attempts to perform work without periods of complete rest inevitably mathematically degrades its useful energy into high entropy waste. You aren't just feeling tired, you are physically bleeding energy, and your entire biological system is experiencing the early stages of systemic entropic collapse.
We will explore the uncompromising physics of exhaustion and the biological non-negotiable mandate of metabolic restoration.
But before we close the clinic doors for today's session, we want to leave you with a final, lingering, provocative thought to ponder over the coming days. We have talked extensively today about humans merging with AI, becoming these cognitive hybrids to survive the cognitive lag. But let's zoom out and look at the grand, overarching timeline of life on this planet.
If biological evolution took millions of years of brutal trial, error, and uncompromising selection to slowly build the staggering complexity of the human brain,
And we are now voluntarily, enthusiastically, outsourcing our cognitive friction, our deep thinking, and our problem solving to silicon machines in a matter of mere months. Are we actively engineering our own evolutionary dead end? Are we triggering the final irreversible atrophy of our species? Or is there another perspective? Are we simply naturally shedding our old, slow biological hardware to become the distributed nervous system of the ecosystem itself?
it is the ultimate question of our era, whether we are the architects of our own total replacement or simply the biological chrysalis for something entirely new and emergency.
Urgent. Think deeply about that as you navigate your own ecosystems, your offices, and your lives this week. We are glad you survived the diagnosis. Remember to visit drchicks.com to access the full archives, review the models we discussed, and prepare yourself for week 3. Keep evolving.